I like numbers. Started before I could remember. It just felt good working with numbers. I was always playing around with numbers in one way or another, and it was fun to have a bunch of guys over and have them betting on which marble would reach the drain first. I had a lot of energy as a kid. I was inquisitive, and I was the youngest one always in the class because I'd skip. I've always been competitive. I like to read more than most kids. I really like to read a lot. My Aunt Edie gave me a copy of the World Almanac, and that was heaven to me. And I can still tell you that the almost population was 214,006 in 1930. Some numbers just kind of stick with you. And very early, probably when I was 7 or so, I took this book out of the Benson Library called 1,000 Ways to Make $1,000. And one of the ways in this book was having penny weighing machines. And I sat and calculated how much it would cost to buy the first weighing machine and then how long it would take for the profit for that one to buy another one. And I would sit there and create these compound interest tables to figure out how long it would take me to have a weighing machine for every person in the world. I had everybody in the country weighing themselves 10 times a day, and me just sitting there like John D. Rockefeller's weighing machines. The allowance when I was a little boy was a nickel a week, but I liked the idea of having a little more than a nickel a week to work with, and I went into business very early. I started selling Coca-Cola door to door. I sold gum door to door, or sold Saturday Evening Post, Liberty Magazine, Ladies Home Journal, you name it. I think I enjoyed the game almost right from the start. But I like being my own boss. That's one thing I liked about delivering papers. I could arrange the route I wanted. Nobody was bothering me at 5 or 6 in the morning. I was delivering 500 papers a day, and I made a penny a paper, but in terms of compounding, that penny turned into something else. Einstein is reputed to have said that compound interest is the 8th wonder of the world or something like that. And it goes back to that story you probably learned when you were in grade school, where somebody did something for the king, and the king said, "What can I do for you?" And he said, "Well, let's take a chessboard and put 1 kernel of wheat on the first square, and then double it on the second and double it on the third." And the king readily agreed to it, and by the time he figured out what 2 to the 64th amounted to, he was giving away the entire kingdom. So it's a pretty simple concept, but over time, it accomplishes extraordinary things. The first books I read on investment were actually in my dad's office. Pretty soon I read all the books in the office and read some of them more than once. And I still probably spend 5 or 6 hours a day reading.
Look at what's trending today. Our quick roundup of what has you talking.
Well, what's amazing is the stuff he remembers. It's like a little computer, you know. I keep thinking the hard drive will run out of space, but it doesn't.
In the nation, the only permanent way to prosperity is a balanced budget.
You have heard Congressman Howard L. H. Buffett, Republican member of the House of Representatives from Nebraska, speaking
When I was about 12 or 13, we moved to Washington, my family, and I was mad. I was having fun in Omaha. I lost all my friends, and now I moved to a town where they were all strange. So I was very, very unhappy. At school, I just lost interest. I took pleasure in tormenting my teachers. At that time, for example, AT&T was the stock that all teachers owned for their retirement. And I decided that it would drive my teachers a little crazy if I went short the stock, because when you go short a stock, you're betting that it will go down. So I shorted 10 shares of AT&T and then brought the confirmation to school and showed these teachers that I was shorting the stock. They found me a big pain in the neck, but they did think I knew a lot about stocks.
Gentlemen, best Graham.
Ben was this incredible teacher. I mean, he was a natural, and he drew us all in.
Our Wall Street professionals are more accurate in the shorter term than the long-term forecast.
Well, our studies indicate that you have your choice between tossing coins and taking the consensus of expert opinion. And the results are just about the same in each case.
It was like learning baseball from a fellow who was batting 400. It shaped my professional life.
There are two rules of investing, according to Warren, and he learned this from Ben Graham.
When I came back to Omaha in early 1956, I had no idea what I was going to do. But a few months after I came back, some members of the family said, what should we do with our money? And I said, well, I'm not going back in the business of selling stocks, but if you would like to join me in a partnership, I said, I'll be glad to do it. So within a couple of months after coming back, I set up the first partnership. I wrote all the checks individually. I filed 11 income tax returns. I took delivery on stocks for all the different companies. I was a one-man band there for 6 years.
Warren was at that time dealing with small companies, and his investments often were to buy a company that you could figure was a discarded cigar butt, but it had one more smoke in it. And he wanted to buy at the right time to be able to benefit from the one smoke.
The first partnership started with $105,100. I put up the 100 and the other people put up the 105,000. And then at the start of 1962, I moved to Kiewit Plaza. And by the time I moved to Kiewit Plaza, we had $7 million invested, and a fair amount was profits.
Berkshire is an amazing company. It's fourth largest company in the Fortune 500. He is the only person who has ever, from scratch, built a company that is in the top 10 of the Fortune 500.
Well, Berkshire is a holding company of sorts. It owns a large number of separate businesses that operate independently of each other and, to a great extent, from the parent company, Berkshire Hathaway.
Well, Gold's been red hot. My favorite green gold. So strong. All right. Well, we're going to get more from you in a second.
We have maybe 70, maybe 80 businesses, and we ask them to behave in a way that doesn't hurt our reputation at Berkshire Hathaway, but they run their own lives. Other people do most of the decorating of the office, so various things come in. Originally, when I moved in 1962, you can see this. I went down to the South Omaha Library, and I think for $1, I got 7 copies of old New York Times from big times like the Panic of 1907. This is one, 1929, obviously. But I wanted to put on the walls days of extreme panic in Wall Street, just as a reminder that anything can happen in this world. I mean, it's instructive art, you can call it. I bought the first shares of Berkshire in 1962, and it was a northern textile business destined to become extinct eventually. And it was a statistically cheap stock in a terrible business. Berkshire Hathaway was closing mills, and as they closed mills, it would free up some capital, and then they would repurchase shares. So I bought some stock with the idea that there would be another tender offer at some point, and we would sell the stock at a modest profit. And at one point, the management asked me at what price we would tender our stock, and I said $11.50. And the tender offer came out a few months later, and it was at $11 3/8, which is 1/8 of a point cheaper. And that made me very mad, so I just started buying more stock. I just felt that I'd been double-crossed by the management, and in May of 1965, I bought enough so we controlled the company, and we changed the management. That was a pretty silly way to behave, as Warren
as recounted in retrospect. One of the reasons Warren's successful is he's brutal in appraising his own past. He wants to identify misthinkings and avoid them in the future. But it was an accident that he chose Berkshire Hathaway. If the chairman hadn't tried to cheat him out of an eighth, there wouldn't have been any Buffett-Berkshire Hathaway history.
If you're emotional about investment, you're not going to do well. You may have all these feelings about the stock has no feelings about you. Looking back, it's interesting, that tender offer, I didn't realize it, but it happened about 5 days after my dad had died, and whether that had affected me or not, I don't know.
Money by cheating people.
Warren's opinions of Wall Street investment bankers would not endear him to their mothers. He feels that they're, for the most part, not out for their clients. They're out for their own business interests.
In the late 1960s, there were just a flood of accounting shenanigans and mergers built upon false accounting and misleading people. It was a time when a lot of charlatans were prevailing in Wall Street and were being applauded by Wall Street. And I understood what the game was about, but I didn't want to play in it. So I closed down the partnership at the end of 1969, and I took on the title of chairman for Berkshire Hathaway.
Well, I think the modern Berkshire is pretty much all a reflection of Warren.
I have constructed a business that fits me. It's kind of crazy to spend your life painting if you're painting a subject you don't want to look at. I've gotten to paint my own painting in business on an unlimited canvas, in a way. It's a different sort of place. I work with a great group of people that make my life very easy and that take good care of me. We have 25 people in the office, and if you go back, it's the exact same 25, the exact same ones. We don't have any committees at Berkshire. We don't have a public relations department. We don't have investor relations. We don't have a general counsel. We don't have a human relations department. We just don't go for anything that people do just as a matter of form. It's exactly the life I like. And it's not work to me. It's just a form of play, basically.
Everyone wants to hear what Warren Buffett has to say.
The Oracle of Omaha, building his image and having some fun.
Berkshire shares have increased more than 2,000% in value.
One of the largest market capitalizations in the world, and it could grow a lot larger since Warren Buffett shows no sign of slowing down.
So how did he do it? By investing in what he knows and understands. Good old-fashioned American brands like Coca-Cola, Fruit of the Loom, and Dairy Queen.
What inspired you?
This inspired me.
Find what you like. Is that what
Yeah, absolutely. Today, the Coca-Cola Company will sell almost 2 billion 8-ounce servings of one form or another of Coca-Cola products. Now, if you get an extra penny a day, a penny a serving, that's $20 million a day. That's $7.3 billion a year from 1 penny more. When you own Coca-Cola, you own a little piece of the minds of billions and billions of people. That is really good.
Who's got the most $100 bills these days? Well, his name is Warren Buffett in this country, and he has just displaced his friend Bill Gates as the richest businessman in the world.
And the purpose of Wednesday's meeting was to discuss Buffett's company, Berkshire Hathaway's plan to purchase railroad giant Burlington Northern. Valued at $26 billion, this would be Buffett's largest acquisition ever.
He's created Berkshire from virtually nothing into hundreds of billions of dollars of market cap. Nobody else has a record like that.
He wanted to have an outstanding reputation, that he never really upset the apple cart when he bought a business, that he kept the management in place. He was establishing a reputation that paid off later in life. It's been building and building ever since I've known him.
A remarkable decision tonight from one of the richest men in the world. Mega billionaire Warren Buffett says he is giving away most of his fortune to charity.
Buffett has pledged to give away the bulk of his fortune to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and giving more than 15% of his money to foundations started by his 3 children and his late wife, Susan.
One global health activist called what Buffett did today one of the most remarkably selfless acts that history will ever record.
That's a better hand than I get at a Berkshire Hathaway meeting. I'd like to thank you for coming. It's a great day for me. It's a great day for my family. My wife, Susie, and I had planned that whatever I made would go back to society. And originally, I thought she would outlive me and that she'd make the big decision on it. But since her death, I had to rethink the best way to get the money into society and have it used in the most effective way. And I had a solution staring me in the face.
It was completely out of the blue. I mean, amazing. The largest single gift ever given was what he gave away that day.
I'd like to ask the people representing those various foundations to come out. First 3 letters are easy to sign. I just signed Dad.
When he wrote the letter to us, he put something in that letter that was incredibly important to me, which was exactly how our foundation behaves, which is if you're going to try to bat 1,000, you won't do very many things that are important. But if you're willing to basically strike out a few times, you can really change something big.
ICCN! Well, I feel terrific about the fact that my 3 children each run a separate foundation that combines their special interests, whether it's early education or whether it's farming in areas where people's techniques for using small plots of land could use a lot of improvement. All kinds of ways, vaccines, you name it.
More powerful than Buffett's gift is the message he's sending to other wealthy Americans, that those who have the least in this world should benefit from those who have the most.